a record of the delightful piece they're going to play this evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, 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 your attention, please, attention, please, attention, please.
And now the moment we've been waiting for is here.
All right, everything's good to go.
All right, so hey everybody, it's our next episode for the podcast. Today I'm fortunate enough and thankful to have a buddy of mine, Jack, on here. Same show as always. You're having Hazy Dialect helping me co-host this. You can find us on Spotify. We're looking to also move over to different platforms right now. Still getting down to raps, but for now it's just on Spotify. Hazy.
Hey everybody, it's Hazy Dialects. Seeing everything in HD. So we have a special guest here. So we like to I don't know. I feel like I can hear some static, but I would like to introduce our guest. Jesus.
Awesome. Howdy, folks. My name is Jack. I am a law school student based out of the East Coast. I'm very into politics, philosophy, all that good stuff. If you guys listen to the show, I'm sure that you get the type of people that usually come on, and I'm happy to be here today.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I remember finding Jack through us on, Twitter Spaces, but he was pretty interested, young, smart guy who talks a lot about law, talks about his experience into that. If you don't mind saying personal much, would you mind sharing, your college experience? Hey, this is what I went through type thing. What would you recommend, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, man, totally. So I went through a very large state school in North Carolina. Actually, heck, it's NC State. I won't hold my card close to the chest because I don't really care. But I went through NC State, graduated there last year with degrees in finance and philosophy. Real quick, Solo, do you want me to talk more about? And of course, we can do whatever. But my experience in college or the application.
You can talk about whatever you want, man. I thought that'd be interesting bringing it up. What got you there? What I don't know for you. What was interesting for you to get you into this field, basically?
Totally. So for me, I came into college sort of as I suspect most kids do. Sort of, you do college because you're supposed to. It's something that you're just expected to do growing up. I was not the most academic guy in high school, and that led to me not getting into some colleges that I probably could have gotten into, but that's neither here nor there. Long story short, I wound up at NC State, and everyone kind of wants to be a part of a good major is the sort of moniker. You want to be a finance guy or an accounting guy or you want to do econ, something like that. There's this huge encouragement that you see at most colleges, and I experienced this at State, this sort of pressure to go into what's considered a good major, something that's really serious, going to make you money, so on and so forth. And so I was a accounting major for the first year and a half, just about. I think that's, about a year and a half. And I hated it. I mean, I can't even explain. I was decent enough at accounting. I was good at it. But I really found myself just not fulfilled. I've always been fairly religious. Sometimes, in my youth, it was more of a sort of spiritual, I'm vaguely Christian, I'm a non-denom guy. Well, I was raised Methodist, but we didn't take it super seriously. We went to church on Sundays, and that was basically it. And as I proceeded through college, I found this, this fundamental lack of calling to the profession that I had signed myself up for. And so, in I guess the second semester of my sophomore year, I wandered into a philosophy class. I think it was what was it? It was ancient philosophy. So Aristotle, Plato, so on and so forth. And I wandered my way into this class, and sit down. It wasn't even on my schedule. I just kind of slapped it on, or wandered in and slapped it on eventually, and I just loved it from the jump. We were talking. I think we started with Plato, and then Aristotle, who remains maybe my favorite philosopher. But all of a sudden, I found this, appeal of something, this sort of serious intellectual quality in that sort of stuff that you just don't really get in a lot of what are considered good majors. And that's not to say that no one who is an accountant or a finance guy is really smart. Of course, there are plenty of guys that are really smart, but I think that those fields do not reflect a real search for anything beyond, okay, what's going to make me money this next day. And that I think is really distinctly what I found lacking in the business field. However, at this point, I was pretty far along in my career already. I had done 3 semesters of classes dedicated to accounting, and so I didn't want to just drop all of that. So what I did was I took a couple more philosophy classes, signed up for I think 3 that semester, and loved all of them. That just confirmed this sort of instinct that I had, that this was something that I was really interested in. And eventually I added that philosophy as a second major, and from there I started doing independent study, so on and so forth. And I wound up getting 2 degrees in the normal amount of time, which I guess I was lucky to do, I'd say. Most if I went into most disciplines at that point, I probably would not have been able to finish them in just 2.5 years effectively. But I tore through my accounting stuff. I tore up my accounting stuff, I guess, and switched into finance because it was a little bit of a lighter workload. Tore through that and really just burned through my philosophy stuff. Started taking it really seriously. I found such great fulfillment in that, and what I think that points to, and I'm sorry for this rambling answer, so I hope you don't mind, but what I found really, I think the insight to be drawn from that is fundamentally that when people go into college, and I'm sure if anyone's listening, they're about to go into college, or even if they're in college, and they've been sort of funneled into one of these majors that they're told up and down is going to make them good money, it's going to be a nice livelihood, so on and so forth. There is great value in bucking that, and when you come across something that you find really valuable, that you think really means something, or means a lot more to you than what the prevailing winds tell you is the right thing to do, then you should follow your heart to an extent. I'm an Aristotelian, and I think that reason is uber important, but there is a certain level at which you simply have to trust your instincts, trust your gut, and take that leap. I think it's been really great for me. It led me towards law school, and we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But it led me towards law school, and I've found my time with philosophy incredibly fulfilling and far more useful, I think, than anything that I've done in finance. I could read whatever financial report you want me to read. It's not going to tell me anything about you as a person. It's not going to tell me anything about the truth, or about metaphysics, or about truth as a whole, and all of that stuff I've learned from philosophy. And so I think it's a great discipline, and it's something that really everyone should at least dip their toes into.
Okay, I found it quite interesting, the idea that you changed, you didn't change majors, but you added on philosophy. And philosophy, to a certain extent, is understanding the baseline for certain ideas or principles that you should or ought to adhere to. While we look at economics and finances as a way to maximize basically our living arrangements and having a security in which our ongoing life is going, or whatever that trajectory might be, at the same time, I think it's very important that we also are extremely mindful that college is going to have an indefinite effect in your life. People often bring up the fact that, what I mean by this is that people often bring up that going to college is paramount. It is the most tantamount thing you can do in terms of its importance in your life and how it can change your life. Most people understand that there's a $1 million difference in terms of having an occupation through that academic field, or even just picking up an occupation through a trade job. So these are two things that people often like very much emphasize in terms of like your well-being. But I also believe that there is a sort of like fulfillment that people often miss out on. Like financial security is one thing, but also sturdiness and a soundness in the mind that you're doing something that you find fulfilling is also paramount to just, well, living life in a sense. So while people often talk about financial security, I would then want to just ask this question, in terms of just philosophy, what was like the thing that came to you, like immediately, that just gravitated you to it?
I think what gravitated me towards it, and I was about to touch on this earlier, and I kind of let that thread go by mistake. But like I said, I was always something of a churchgoer. I had this innate attraction to higher things, quote unquote. Meaning God, questions of God, theology, so on and so forth. And I had never really done any in-depth theological study to that point, but I think that I think when it really hit me was reading Aristotle's argument in relation to the unmoved mover. That we're all familiar with this formulation. It's fairly famous. The idea of it's essentially a cosmological argument where he can trace back through this chain of causation the fact that there is this necessary first cause that what he essentially describes without knowing it, and despite being several hundred years before the advent of Christianity, what he effectively describes is the Christian God in this formulation, and that was where that, at least that's what jumps to mind as what really hit me, where I went, oh, this is infinitely more important that I understand this sort of stuff than any what's on any balance sheet of any firm. My experience in accounting pales in comparison to the importance of the stuff that you learn in some of those classes, and I think that was really one thing that supremely attracted me to it. And as I started to delve more and more, I picked up a whole lot of theology, particularly from St. Thomas Aquinas. And when I began to study this stuff more and more, it pointed me towards a realization about the way that education, I think, should be properly conceived of. Because you touched a little bit on how some people, for a lot of people, that your education, your college education, is fundamentally about, or at least is largely about, preparing you for a job, training you to make money in the real world, and that's well and good. However, I think that the classical conception of education is much better, and that is essentially that the job of education is not to prepare you for a trade necessarily. It may do that, but that's incidental. The job of education is to educate you fundamentally. It's about refining your reason and exalting your virtue and making you into a model citizen, not just one that can make money, but one who is founded in a worldview that is coherent and that's good and that seeks to better society in a serious way. Because I could have gone through and been an accountant and probably be making some pretty good money right now. However, I would know nothing about why I really need to make money, or why I should be doing certain things with my money or not doing other things with my money, and fundamentally about what I wouldn't know much about what is truth, what there is, what these fundamental questions are, and I think that those things are paramount to any functioning person. Certainly to a religious person, I think they should be extremely striking to them. And so as I stumble upon this as a fairly religious guy, it just kind of sent a light bulb off in my head that made me go, this is what I need to be studying. This is the kind of stuff that I need to be learning. All of that other stuff is sort of supplemental. But yeah, I hope that answers the question adequately.
Oh,
Yeah,
did
it
really-
did an excellent job. I think the bankruptcy of the soul is a recurring facet I often find myself discussing with very religious people. So I think it's often equally important that we got that strongly illustrated by what you were saying here. So I do appreciate that answer. Solo was about to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off, my guy. Go ahead and speak.
No, you're all good. I was gonna say the same thing, similar to my path when I tried to get when I was in the military, trying to be a paralegal, where I at the time didn't know yet, but I took a philosophy class in high school, and then we're talking about law, order, and to me, I was very Nietzsche nihilist pilled, being like, well, none of this matters. There is no law. It's all law of the strength. Who is the strongest? Then
Might equals right.
yeah, might equals right. Basically, was a lot of my philosophy, and it was very black pilled in thinking. And then eventually, I still felt like that answer didn't satiate enough. I still felt like I had a hole in my reason and logic. Like I felt like there's something out there I'm not equating into this. Is it really that simple that we're all just brutal animals? Whoever's the strongest is on top. And then that's when I got more into theology at the time. I was looking into that stuff, but I got into a job being a paralegal, learning more about hey, this is law, this is order, what is these things, what is objective, what is subjective. And I find it interesting, me and you both kind of what led to the same conclusion, and what did that bring us to, but to theology. And for me, I think the argument that got me really thinking again was the clockmaker argument, where a buddy told me, the complexities of the universe and the probability of our existence, let alone intelligent existence. He would explain like this. He's like, imagine right now, I give you an 1800s era clock, those old school hand clocks you have. He says, I'm going to take it apart piece by piece to the smallest cog, put it all in a nice tiny little box for you, close it and hand it to you. I'm like, okay. He says, now I want you to shake that box as hard as you can until you open it again, and it's a perfectly designed clock that works and, gets back together. To me, I know it sounds cheesy, but to me, that actually stuck with me. And then he followed it up with, told him, that's impossible. There's no way you could do that. And he's like, okay, what do you think about the universe? Because that's infinitely times harder than what the scenario I gave you, basically.
Totally.
Which is something that really interested me in, the question of, what is, it to exist? What is it to be human? And, I find joy in my life of servitude to Christ and being able to, be openly happy about being Christian, tell people about that as much as I can. So that's something I've really enjoyed.
Interesting enough, I want to ask you both questions about it. Since we're all very enamored to some degree with philosophy, I want to get your ideas about nihilism, since I think we've all touched upon the subject matter to some degree, but I wanted to know that it had any direct effect on your life in any degree, on your perception of reality and what it is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so when we say, does nihilism have an effect on my life, it certainly has, in the sense that there were periods where I was nihilistic. There was a period in particular during freshman year of college, and I guess early sophomore year really too, where I effectively stopped going to church. And again, I had not been exposed to anything in the field of philosophy, and so I wasn't thinking about these issues very deeply. And I think that one thing that we can praise Nietzsche here and there for his pure reason and his ability to logic his way to things, and the fact that he does have, I suppose, some good insights in the absence of God. Were God not to exist, then Nietzsche's philosophy would be a lot more sensible, I think. And to that end, there was a period where I was essentially living without God, and with that being the case, I think that there is a very clear attraction to nihilism, in the sense that most, if not all, really, moral systems that are built in purely secular fashion, I think don't stand up to reason. I mean, there was maybe the most famous attempt at doing this is Kant's formulations with pure reason, where he tries to build this worldview off of the categorical imperative, where he tries to make this purely secular philosophical system and ethical system that could structure society in a really effective way, purely through the light of his own natural reason. And this is what I think is the error of the Enlightenment, is that that's very clearly impossible. I mean, Hegel, in one fell swoop, in a small article, completely annihilates Kant's system, because he points out that all of Kant's moral precepts are in fact present, even when he is just saying that what he's saying is purely reasonable. He assumes certain things are good and bad. The famous formulation that I've heard is that if you take the maxim, the moral proposition that let's say I am a crazy lawn care enthusiast. I'm obsessed with the well-being of my lawn, and I think that if anyone steps on my lawn, I should axe murder them and drag their body off my lawn, and I'm entitled to do that. That maxim actually passes Kant's categorical imperative, because and for anyone who doesn't know, the way that the categorical imperative works in this question would effectively be, do you want anyone who comes onto your lawn to get axe murdered? Yes? Okay, that passes stage one. If you universalize that maxim, does it contradict anything? So if you universalize that maxim where everyone would axe murder anyone who came onto their lawn, does that contradict the well-being? Does that damage the well-being of your lawn? The answer is no. So it can be universalized without contradicting itself. And the third step is, do you think that this is still a good maxim? Do you think that this is still a good proposition? And that lawn care enthusiast would still answer yes, because he believes that everyone should want to axe murder anyone who comes onto their lawn. So this is the sort of Hegelian rebuttal to Kant, is that his categorical imperative is what he calls an empty formalism. It's this kind of mechanism without any purpose behind it, and without any real basis to it. And I think that is a completely correct finding from Hegel. I think that fundamentally all moral systems, other than really nihilism, must be based on something that is a brute fact, that is simply there, that you can't deny. And in most cases, I think that item is God. And some people can believe that you can base one off of a prevailing culture or sort of popular opinion. I think that that's wrong, but it's certainly stronger than saying that you can just build a entire society off of pure reason. So, I think that in lieu of God, you are simply left with nihilism overwhelmingly. And so I think that's the attraction to so many people. And I think that's why I was that way when I wasn't, a church-going Christian.
For me, I'd say definitely when I don't know about you, Jack, when I was going through my atheist phase as well, I ended up being really heavy into Nietzsche and reading a lot of his works. And like I said, for people who don't understand philosophy, you have, like, on one end, people like St. Thomas Aquinas, who's very heavy in theology, natural law, and stuff like that, where you'll have the complete polar opposite of a German man known as Nietzsche, to be like, actually, God was real, but we killed him. We slain God, basically. And he was the polar opposite, where it is a very cold, dark world out there, basically. And at the end of the day, there's no room for apathy or empathy if you want to survive. You got to, fend for yourself, and do your own thing and become your own individual and basically step on others. And it was a very brutalistic view. And I say this, and I do not say this lightly, but I felt like Nietzsche was truly an atheist. And what I mean is, a lot of people nowadays who claim they're atheists and stuff like that aren't really atheists. And I'd say a good 9% of them. And what I mean is, you have this new age movement like Sam Harris and stuff. These people... You have Nietzsche, though. Nietzsche would say, flat out, yes, I, as a mere mortal, decree here that God does not exist. Not that, oh, well, I don't think God exists. Well, there's no evidence for that. That's the New Age atheism. And then it pisses me off because I'll always ask a New Age atheist this question. I'll say to them, they'll be like, "Oh, I'm atheist." I'm like, "Okay, so you decree that, God does not exist. That is your statement. That is your priori."
Yeah.
And they'll respond with, "Oh no, that's a bit strong. I'm more than certain that he doesn't exist." I'm like, "Okay, but if you're nothing but absolute in this statement, it's how heavy of a toll atheism weighs on people. You are
You're not
agnostic.
really.
Yeah, you're not a real atheist." I'm not trying to say that to be smug, but I had a certain respect in a weird way because I saw Nietzsche and his work and literature almost to be like a sweet poisoned wine, if that makes sense. It was very alluring and it makes you feel powerful, but the crash just isn't worth it because at the end of the day, you have a man who up front stands against God and said he has slain him, but on top of that says, I also have my own moral theory made by a mere mortal to replace you. And that's the issue you have with all these philosophers, regardless of what they are. You have Hume, people like that. I'm sorry, but if you try to slay, God itself, the very essence and concept of divine, and replace it with a moral man-made theory, you're going to leave a gaping hole in you. And that's what I felt most of the time I was reading Nietzsche. Like, I would tell myself, like, yeah, I'm the strongest, I'll step on those to get my positions. But it felt hollow. It felt empty, basically, And then that's when I realized, like, here comes, like, almost like the wine cup. You have that same wine cup that's the poison, and then here comes, me reading about St. Thomas Aquinas, reading about Christ, Kierkegaard, people like that. And it was almost, that's why I always say Kierkegaard is the polar opposite of Nietzsche. It was almost like having that cup of wine that's full to the brim, and then someone coming through with a carton of water and just slowly start pouring more and more until eventually all of this poisoned wine is out and is purified water in its place. And to me, that was my salvation. That was my grace. That was me going back into the theology and trying to learn and understand it. Because I told myself, I remember making a promise when I went back into the faith. I said, okay, I'm going to do it different from last time. Last time I just, was like, I was there. I'm actually going to try my hardest to get into apologetics, to understand these arguments. Am I going to be the best out there? Of course not. There's many phenomenal speakers I know, like John, we were speaking to him earlier. Hey, shout out to you, John, if you're listening to this. Or people who are like, Trent Horn or like William Lane Craig, who are phenomenal at speaking. And that's just one of my thing. I'm like, I want to emulate these men so I can get closer to Christ, basically, and be a better representation of my faith and defend it. Because at the end of the day, all of your material goods aren't coming with you to where you go. Like, no one, when you pass away, no one's going to read off your eulogy. This man had, Rolex watches. He had a brand new Mercedes. He had women and alcohol and stuff like that. All that's really going to matter are the people surrounding you in your life. And saying things like he was a good father, he was a good grandfather, he was a good uncle, he was a strong man, he led, the family, he was the anchor for us, he truly was keeping us together, stuff like that. He was a man of Christ. He was a man who seeked Christ's heart. And to me, deep down, when I'm to go, I don't care if I have millions. I don't care if I have, anything like that. I don't care if I'm filthy rich. I'm okay dying, like my rags and stuff like that. What matters to me is my family around me, and I want to be remembered as the person in my family that led my family through these hardships, through Christ bearing. But so everyone on a bit of a ramble or a rant, but that's my personal thing.
No,
That's fine. I thought it was important because while being the only agnostic person in the crowd, yes, I am the apostle amongst all this Christian talk and all this Christian jibber jabber going on here. What is happening right now? What is this? 6 o'clock in the morning? What he say? Never would have made it without you. No. All jokes aside, I had a very different experience with like nihilism, and I find it to be particularly interesting in contrast to what you guys have talked about and discussed at length at this time. Because for me, nihilism has always been a kind of a plaguing thought, like a constant in my thought processes. Whereas rejecting the negativity that is birthed from it, I kind of felt as though I needed to accept it to some degree because it was constantly an emergent idea within my brain. This notion that like nothing matters, nothing is like prosperous, and like ultimately looking upon some of these philosophers, achievers, all these individuals with certain levels of accolades, no matter their contribution to society, would all return to dust at one point or another. Return to ash or return to dust, the inertia. the idea of the universe returning to a constant, from a moving state to a stillness. It's always been a fascination of mine as I've listened to people like Childish Gambino or Kanye West, these artists who constantly discuss the idea of like a legacy and something that lives external of yourself. And these things often made me fascinated even more about the idea of nihilism. And for me, the rejection of nihilism didn't come through because some people believe that none of this matters, and that kind of like disengages their ability to have agency within a society or life as it is. For me, the acceptance of that is like, okay, inconsequential of like my actions, the inevitability of death is for certain, but I believe that finite amount of time, that existence in of itself makes everything I do more important than ever. Because with knowing that certainty is beyond any action I can take upon it, that means that I should prioritize the immediate time I have for the people I have in this world, and to ensure I can do whatever I can to maximize their life. So like that was a fascinating. So why I asked that question, because it was fascinating to me to hear people like different rattlings with these ideas. I've always been somebody. I guess as I came into my adulthood, I was somebody who like accepted that notion of like negativity as being a part, rather than like find a way to detach myself from it, because I don't think that it could have been detached, rather than be accepting, or how fascinating philosophy allows us to look at something that has been a constant in our mentality or our mindset, and allows us to angle it in such a way in which it ameliorates whatever poison, as Solar poetically put, is causing within us. So that's what I wanted to speak to.
Do you mind if I have a bounce off comment off of that real fast?
Absolutely.
So I understand what you mean to a degree, that if this is truly all that there is, and when we die we just take a dirt nap and let the worms feed on our brains, then we should make the most of life. I understand that interpretation. I think it's a very good instinctive response to the nihilist view of the way that the world is ordered, the nihilist epistemological view. However, my instinctive question, and now I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. I guess what I'm trying to ask is fundamentally, even if that's the case, even if the nihilist epistemological worldview is correct, if it is correct, then why affirmatively should you do these things? This is sort of comes back to what I was talking about with that Hegelian rebuttal of Kant. I guess my question is, why should you seek to benefit the well-being of your family, or why should you really do anything at all if the nihilistic worldview is correct? Because it seems that if there is no if we've killed God, if there is no higher power that ordains things, if there is no objective right and wrong beyond might makes right, then who is to say fundamentally, other than the strong, what is right, I guess? Do you know what I mean?
Well, as the filthy, vile, and disgusting liberal, not liberal, but leftist upon the discourse amongst the two of you, I would have to say that, like, what comes back to my mind is just how most political systems implicitly work to some degree. Most people even the most anarchist people who strive for this notion or idea of, oh, I'm out for myself, more than often than not, it often goes back to this intuition, this pump that I believe exists within all of us when it comes to logic and reasoning. And that is that most emotions are like the innate aspect of our moral reasoning and confines, and then we formulate that through like logic. So like that's the ad hoc nature of like our belief systems and how they function. So like the articulation of this is usually that we're looking towards people who are trying to produce some sort of moral good. And the moral good in this sense is just like betterment of like life and the maximization of like that within the society in itself. Like when people often look at like conservatism, or let's say democracy to some degree. It's all these ideas that are attempting to quantify what exactly like creates a good life in a sense. And that understanding for me was the reason why I do my best in terms of discourse in general to not propose some sort of like bad faith actor amongst the people that I discuss most subject matters with, unless I do believe that there is a lack of transparency as to what you're talking about, in which is then I might be more apprehensive engaging with you, or might be extremely critical as to what you're saying. I might want to get to the baseline of what you're talking about. But more often than not, I believe that all these systems to some degree are talking about the quality of life, in which how and when can we maximize that. So I try to operate within that confine, and that's like the implicit like notion that I often engage with when I'm like in dealing with society. And I think that I think this universal facet often is espoused by most philosophy systems, even the most hardcore punk rock metalists that you could think of, who is a nihilist, speaks about the bleakness of society, the dreadness and the meaninglessness of existence, often does not kill themselves. And I believe that that speaks to this, at least this contradiction of you do wish to live life in a better way, but I think that either failings internally or failings externally are causing you to like detach yourself from life to all find it meaningless. Rather, I think that in terms of society and our existence, we often partake into this quality of life production, in which my implicit engagement with that is to try to ensure that, like, in the most simplistic way I can put it, without going to my whole philosophical like confines, I think that like understanding this, or at least that is my implicit buy-in, philosophically speaking, of like how like almost most philosophical systems operate. I often like engage with society and living in that manner. I hope that was concisely put enough.
Yeah, no, I got it.
Jack, how do you think about this? I actually want to bounce this off of you regarding Hazy's point. I've almost in a weird way. Have you seen that meme where it's like an IQ graph for the person of low IQ, there's middle IQ and high IQ, but the low IQ and high IQ people agree?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, for me, it's just like I felt like going through philosophy, low IQ was, almost being like, philosophy is just how to live your life. And then you have middle IQ being like, oh no, there's so many intrinsic meanings for philosophy. And high IQ is like philosophy is telling you how to live your life type thing. And I joke around, but to me, I feel like even politics, philosophy bleeds into politics. Like that's where politics come from. And same with law and all these factors. But what people don't ask is where does philosophy come from? And a lot of philosophy comes from religion. Even the ancient Greeks, they were, although they were polytheistic, they still had a very mono view and some essence of what it is to be divine or God. And what really interests me too is I look at philosophy now, especially, post Enlightenment, and philosophy has evolved. You have people like Rousseau, where it's more of philosophy of the man instead of philosophy divine by God, if you will. Sure. While you have even like the Islamic people, what's his name? Ilbe Salba, I believe. Apologies if I'm butchering his name, but one of the guys who were like, constantly spar of St. Thomas Aquinas, basically in philosophy at the time. But even them, they all came to the same agreement that philosophy is nothing if not led by God or if not based on God. And I look at it like this as one, if you're wondering too, Hazy is bouncing your question, but do you see almost as philosophy to be a way to understand things while theology is a way to live things, if you will? Like seeing like philosophy as almost a tool to get you there, if that makes any sense, basically, and theology is the big picture.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That first way of putting it, I didn't totally understand, but the second way, yes, absolutely. I think that there's a classical sort of formulation that I always forget the exact way that it goes, but it is essentially that we have all these different schools of philosophy, right? Ethics, epistemology, so on and so forth, metaphysics, yada yada. And when you get down to the brass tacks of it, what you find over and over again is this, in my opinion, undeniable fact that theology is effectively where everything else springs from. If your theology says that there is no God and that there is, fundamentally, if it says that there is no God, then you cannot make many serious, other philosophical thoughts off of that. And I don't think that you can order society adequately according to that. And I think that
Craig said a lot on that too. Sorry to cut you off really quick,
You're
but
good.
William Lane Craig, I remember him being posed a question in Q&A where someone asked him smugly, "Do you believe atheists can be moral?" And he pondered on it a minute. He says, "I believe atheists can understand what morality is. My issue, especially when it goes to all subjectivity, is you have no grounds of
they
justification."
don't understand why.
Yeah, you don't understand why. And to me, that stood out because he posed an analogy of, let's say you're walking home at night and you see someone getting murdered, and you're like, stop, don't do that, that's bad. And almost in a weird pseudo twist is like, well, why? And then that question really like slams them, was like, well, you're just sitting there like, yeah, what is my justification? Because you don't like it? Because it doesn't make you feel good? Like, what is your grounding on this reasoning? And I know that sounds like you're looking at it too deep, but when we're talking about theology, I feel like that is, yes, that I am talking about this deep, because that is a very deep subject of divine hiddenness and all these very moving pieces. And I don't know, I was just wondering your thoughts on that too. Like,
Yeah, I mean, this is correct. I think that, and of course, atheists sort of like to laugh off this argument that you can't really know anything about anything if you can't posit the existence of God. They'll sort of laugh it off and act as though it's no big deal because you can just make your own philosophy. Of course, that's transcendentalism. That's not even nihilism, really. But even in the transcendentals, you run into this same problem when they're actually pressed on it, is that they have no justification for their beliefs beyond sort of either beyond sort of stopgaps. They have, okay, well, I think that murder is wrong because popular belief says that murder is wrong. Or I think that
people who base their morality on society, and anytime I see that, I'm like, okay, if you're going to base your pure morality on, like, let's say science or law or like society, that's a very dangerous slippery slope, because what's stopping you from being in an area like World War II Germany, basically? And now you're like, oh, I'm just going with the flow of society, I'm pure Aryan or whatever, or being in a Jim Crow slouch, being like, oh, well, society says these aren't people because of the pigments of their skin, so I'm just going to roll with that. That's why they have less rights than me. Like, I find that to be very dangerous mindset, just, kind of like a groupthink, agreeing with everything type thing, what the crowd says. And that could be very dangerous.
Totally. I think that the only two fundamentally coherent worldviews are those which are based off of religion, that can posit the existence of God, who has a certain will and who has ordained things in a certain order, and that's why we should do these things this way. And the only other entirely consistent one is a true and pure nihilism that does not fade into a sort of transcendentalism, where they effectively admit, yes, there is no absolute right or wrong. The only reason that I can even say that anything is right or wrong is because I'm stronger than you and I can enforce my will upon you. If you can say that, then your worldview is coherent. I think, again, it's wrong. However, it is at least entirely non-contradictory at the end of the day. If might makes right, and I'm a nation that says that baby murder is permissible, then I can enforce my will upon my society. However, if I think that what so many nihilists stray into, and what makes so much of their worldview incoherent, is that they try to claim at the same time that there is no God, there is no absolute morality, and yet all of these things that I don't like are objectively wrong. They're not just wrong in this for this society or this society where with this governing body, they are objectively wrong, and that's why we can send oodles of money into foreign countries in order to preserve democracy, or in order to push certain ethical views of our nation, despite there being no God. I think that is internally inconsistent, and I think it fails fundamentally just about every serious philosophical inquiry.
And one last thing, and I'm going to let Hazy, sorry about that, Hazy, for going back and forth a bunch. My ADD's kicking in, and I know if I don't say this, I'll forget it. Another good example, too, what you're talking about is, like, people don't know. People like to talk bad about the history of the Catholic Church, but they don't know. I always ask this question to people, like, in America, who do you think was the Ku Klux Klan's biggest enemy, their biggest person to get over? And people will be like, oh, the Black Panthers, or oh, this group or this group. I'm like, nope. Historically, since the beginning, it's been the Catholic Church, because you'll have the Catholic Church saying, like, hey, I don't think it's right for you to lynch a man because of the color of their skin. And then they're like, oh, well, God told us to do this. And we're like, no, they didn't. And then it pissed them off because they'd be like, well, we're basing our faith off of this, therefore it's okay. And it's one of those things where if an atheist tries to slander, like, Catholicism, I don't care. Like, I feel almost sympathetic to them. And, like, you poor little thing. And I'm not trying to sound demeaning, but to me, it's like, I understand why you don't like us, because to you view us as your enemy, when to me, I view you as a brother. But, like, when I see someone who's, like, wears the mark of, like, a cross, or say, I'm a Christian, and they're doing horrible names in the name of Christ, it pisses me off, because I'm like, no, Christ didn't say, basically discriminate and harm others for these things. Like, that's disgusting. That's not Christianity.
The fundamental Protestant issue, and I say this as an Anglican. Anglicans, we like to say, people will lump us in with Protestants, but we really are in many respects. We have the Catholic foundations of our faith, in that we ascribe to the Archbishop of Canterbury in the place of the Pope, so on and so forth. And fundamentally, I think that the issue that so many Protestants, and this is particularly the case with Baptists and non-denominationals and Pentecostals too, really run into, is that I think that the doctrine of sola scriptura, whatever you want, or if you would like to say, faith alone, whatever name you want to put on it, I think that the individual nature of it, which allows a man to interpret the Bible however he would like, and effectively make his own brand of Christianity, I think that enables people to ignore fundamental parts and fundamental truths that are not deniable from any realistic standpoint of the faith. One thing that I have a great deal of respect for in the Catholic tradition, and this is also present in the Anglican tradition, is that we have established ways in which we are positively supposed to view Scripture, in which we are doctrines which we are ordered to have, not that are optional, not that are sort of, oh, this is what my minister says, so this is right. But no, that we actually believe that these are divinely given ordinances that we should follow in all circumstances if we're able. And of course, that's not to say that no Catholic or no Anglican has ever done anything wrong. Of course, you have people who act improperly and contradict their faith. It is to say that the Baptist tradition, for instance, cannot ultimately refute the arguments of people who say, "Oh, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan because the Holy Spirit told me to." That's my little bounce off of that. But yeah, sorry, we've been going for a while.
My bad. I feel bad. Hazy, I didn't mean to leave you again. Theology I get into. I get Bible thumper.
I was like, these guys is going.
I feel the spirit of God.
These guys.
I'm like, I gotta pop off real quick. One moment.
You two were having a whole vibe off session without me. I was like, all right.
My bad.
You're fine. It's also I would say to some degree that all of it's like I think it's very fascinating to just discuss at length. In terms of just the idea about morality and where does it come from to some degree, because I think that's where a lot of this is pinpointing at. And I think that it's very hard to find like people who are devout, like believers of the faith that don't have like some sort of epistemic, like a foundation for as to why they believe a particular thing or something, or can articulate it well enough beyond just saying that it is repugnant or immoral and it is the word of the God to speak as much into existence. While like the milk, if a woman is unfaithful, there is moments where like in terms of like infidelity, there's moments within scripture that speaks to us like give her this milk, and she's like lying or deceptive about like her faith. I mean, deceptive about like what she has told you, then like her child would pass, which is basically quintessential. Like I would say like it's comparable to abortion to some degree, but it's not like the way that it's handled within like larger society in terms of just people getting them on the whim or like not being financially capable of doing so. Like they don't believe that a child isn't alive per se, but it's just having an abortion because it is an inconvenience to some degree. So like that's like a drastically different thing. We can just that is occurring there. But at the same time, in terms of what you were talking about earlier, I would have never posit that like my morality is I would say that most people would be, if they're atheists, I think it'd be like a slap in your own face, like literally almost like a cartoon Tom and Jerry, the garden hose hits you in the face moment, if you were to ever say that morality is objective while simultaneously believing in there be no omniscient rules that exist within the reality. But at the same time, I would say that in terms of just religious beliefs, I oftentimes I'm a very much a advocate of just people being more articulate about those type of things, and just I like even hosting like talks, like me and Sola have like host talk, which is just purely just having with people talk back and forth about such matters, and I just enjoy those spaces really a lot because I don't think there's a lot of productive spaces in which it's I think also it's kind of concerning to some degree. Like let's accept, I often look at people who do accept the notion of like a God or omniscient being that is just unquestionably a part of what particular faith they do have. And while I do believe that some people can go rapid with their own interpretation, because I don't believe that simply by having religion, it behooves you to have an objective observation as to reality it is, because some people go astray with that interpretation. Some people defile said interpretation. Some people go as far as to exploit said interpretation, such as one of the biggest churches down in the South being unwilling to help people out during a flood. Certain instances of those mega churches that exist are just a bastardization of the word and how it's supposed to help its common man. But at the same time, I understand that like simply having that that wealth of knowledge, as the Bible would be treated by people who have by just religiosity, and people who can find solace in it. It can also be used in a misguided way, which at the same time I was.
Totally, yeah. Real fast to bounce off that. I'm not. I don't think that just to clarify my position, I'm not saying that every Christian is morally upright, or even that the vast majority of Christians have the correct interpretation of Scripture. I think that all of the development of human religion is a pursuit towards the correct interpretation of Scripture or Revelation or of God. And I think that to respond to what you said about certain denominations that have these abhorrently, obviously incorrect interpretations of Scripture, my basic response is their view of quote unquote moral objectivity is incorrect. I mean, just at ground level, there are things that you can find, in the Baptist tradition, you can't really pin down a great number of Baptists on any given thing, because they only believe certain, they only uniformly believe certain things, such as the Apostles' Creed, so on and so forth. And there's this great variance in the Baptist tradition as to
their interpretation of Scripture verse by verse. And what I kind of was referring to when I talked about the Catholic and Anglican interpretation is that there is this uniformity to it that discourages that variance, and therefore I think, for one thing, it generally strays into error less because you have less of you have just a pure smaller number of amalgamations of different interpretations of Scripture, and I think it also is generally closer to the truth because there are many more real academic and I guess searches in those traditions. The same goes for Presbyterians to an extent. Presbyterians have some really good theology. But yeah, does that make sense? I mean, I'm not saying that all Christians are correct in their interpretation, because obviously that would just be impossible because we have conflicting interpretations.
Yeah, I was really that was a part that stuck out to me, so I'm glad you alleviate. I was thinking about it in that regard of like, can the same be said for like some observations I would certainly say that do exist within society are definitely like an issue in how they are ascertained, or what is ascertained from people when they take upon certain biblical scripture, because I don't think that people hey, oh my bad, 1 second, just
That was my bad, I cut out.
if you okay,
Sorry, I don't know what happened. Please go on.
No, sorry guys, I'm still
okay,
here.
yeah, oh yeah, but yeah,
Hey, Hazy,
I
I'm
think
still
that
here.
I think that can perfectly wrap up our discussions about philosophy. I think it was engaging, and hopefully we can have another space, or even invite you over for another episode. But as a law person, as an individual who's really thumping a different type of book, a person who's into the politics, into the larger picture, as a leftist, I don't think any politics exists. Actually, it's just the grand story. No. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of political discourse and affirmative action, what do you think is a large misconception about its functionality that people often don't bring up in social discourse or just in common parliament?
Yeah, are we talking, just to make sure that I'm clear on the question, are we talking about the functionality of law writ large, or of affirmative action specifically? I don't want to
Yeah,
stray.
affirmative action.
Okay.
Affirmative action, yeah.
Sure. I think that well, let's see, misconception. I think that one misconception that we tend to have is, and this may sound overzealous, but one misconception that tends to arise is that affirmative action, as it existed until this recent decision, was sort of even-handed. There's this notion in sort of pop culture, and particularly among the sort of middle IQ folks, that affirmative action is sort of marginal. It's decided in marginal cases, that it's in line with the famous decision in Bach, where Sandra Day O'Connor, who wrote the majority opinion, said of the Supreme Court, said that race can essentially be used as a tiebreaker in academics. So if you have a white student with a SAT of, say, 1360 and a 3.9 GPA, and you have a white student with the exact same stats, that then it's used as a sort of tiebreaker to give favoritism to the African American student, and that kid gets admitted and the white kid doesn't. That I think is sort of the common conception in a lot of people's minds, particularly a lot of liberals' minds, of how affirmative action worked. And the fact of the matter is, that's not how it worked at all. I mean, I've got there's a wonderful study that we spoke a little bit about before we went live, but it's called, for anyone who wants to read it, it's called "A Systemic Analysis of Affirmative Action in American Law Schools." It's by Richard Sander, and the reason that it's a study of law school is that law schools have much better records kept than do general colleges. But and what he found was essentially that this was not just a tiebreaker, but rather it in direct contravention actually of that Bach decision. What the practices of the overwhelming majority of schools in the country did was that it essentially insulated races from competing with one another on the academic scale. So the way that he puts it is that he derives a academic index, I think is the phrase that he uses, which is sort of it's a conglomeration of undergraduate GPA and your LSAT score. The LSAT score is the law school admissions test, and it's sort of the SAT for law school. And what he found was that there were these gargantuan discrepancies in the academic quality that it took for a student to be admitted to a certain school that were the gap was caused purely according to race. So, for instance, I've got this index here. If you take a student for so there's a chart for non-minority applicants and a chart for underrepresented minority applicants, and if we take, for instance, this is their competitiveness at the University of Michigan, which is a elite law school. I think they're ranked number 9 this year. And what you see is that for a white student, we'll go with the median. For a white student with an academic index between the numbers 690 and 750, so this is a very good student who scored reasonably well. Actually, for Michigan, it would have to be, by most standards, very well on the LSAT score. You're probably scoring about the 90th percentile in LSAT, and you've got a strong GPA. For a white student in that circumstance, you have a 23% chance of being admitted to the University of Michigan. For a black student with not for a black student, excuse me, for an underrepresented minority applicant, who has the same academic index, scored the same on the LSAT, and has a similar GPA, he has a 93% chance. So that's 70% discrepancy in the difference of chances.
Can you reiterate those numbers one more time?
Sure. So if you take a black student and a white student, I'm just going to try to standardize it, who have a academic index score between 690 and 750. So again, you're doing well. The black student has a 93% chance of being admitted to the University of Michigan Law School, which is again a great school. And for a white student with the same numbers, he has a 23% chance. So it's 93 versus 23. And so I guess with that, and there are all sorts of different charts and tables in this study that demonstrate this a little bit further and in more extreme terms. What you see is that
sorry about that, guys. You read the messages.
You're good.
Jack, really quick.
I can wrap up.
You. No, you don't have to wrap up, man. I actually want to go more on your point, more in depth. Didn't this whole affirmative action thing debates spark interest because of Asian students in Harvard, or was this something else?
Yes. So the fact is that whites are. I use whites because it's sort of in the pop culture. It's more commonly mentioned by conservatives, and that's what I tend to go with.
He's using predominant English vernacular. This man dog whistling.
Well, no. I'm just saying.
I joke.
You're good. But, what's also featured, and of course what I used at the beginning of the phrase was non-minority applicants versus underrepresented minority applicants. This is sort of academic language. Underrepresented minority applicants consist of blacks, Hispanics, immigrants, first-generation immigrants, and those non-minority applicants, the way they're actually considered in the academic world, that is whites and Asians. So those two groups are put together there. It is true that whites were that whites have been actively discriminated against. However, just to clarify, that discrimination that you saw is even more severe among Asians. I don't have a specific table here that breaks it down by specific race. I just have non-minority and underrepresented minority. However, what we can expect is that for an Asian student who has those same numbers, again, I said that non-minority applicants have a 23% chance with an academic index score of between 690 and 750. for an Asian, you can expect that it would be even lower than 23%. It would be somewhere in the range of 20 to 15%, maybe. Of course, that's just a ballpark number. But the reason I think that it's good, and again, I used white just because I was going off the top of my head, but the reason that it's good to use non-minority applicants is that helps standardize the data a little bit more, because there are significantly fewer Asians than there are whites, just as a fact of the matter, and so there's a lot more variance in the data, and so adding them into the white demographic, that tends to make the data a little bit more streamlined and clear cut. But yeah, so I think to come back to the original question, I think that the chief misconception about affirmative action and the way that it worked was that it was this sort of even-handed, okay, we're just giving this tiny leg up to minority applicants or to underrepresented minority applicants, but it's not really that unfair, and it's sort of a nice way to bring these different groups into the upper echelons of the economic and social stratosphere. The fact is, that's not what happened. What really was happening was a just egregiously unfair and discriminatory practice that systematically insulated the races from competition with one another in the academic application pool, and that is wholly unacceptable, as the court found, and I'm very happy with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has overruled Bach.
And that you mentioned that too, Hazy, really quick. That you mentioned that too. Something that a lot of people don't know is that during that 1964, civil rights era, the original proposition or solution on the table was that the government would actually get more investment and funding in like poor areas and like predominantly, like areas for minorities, like, hey, let's fix their education. But instead, the government said, like, no, screw that. We'd rather give you a wheelchair than a crutch. And what I mean is, like, a crutch is meant for, let's say you have a sprained ankle, it helps you get back on your feet. Well, wheelchair, you're just stuck in a wheelchair. You're not getting out of that seat. You're always going to have that. And that's something that irritated me, because I would have, like, in some weird alternative, like, history scenario, I felt like government at least making the attempt of putting more and aiding in, like, education in, like, poor areas could have done something. Like, I'm sure it wouldn't have, like, solved everything, but it would have done a lot better than, like, affirmative action did. Because if you go to the root of the problem, it always goes back to, to, like, high school education, middle school education, like, these poor areas not having the means to help people get out of a scenario. And education is power. We see this through history. And I feel like we were able to get at the root of it that could do a lot more good, basically.
Absolutely. And to make one, I hope I'm not keeping you solid, but if I can springboard into one more comment based on that, what affirmative action really did, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, but it's made very clear later on in this study. I'll see if I can find the exact reference, but Thomas Sowell, the Stanford academic, has spoken extensively about this. Is that what affirmative action caused was, because there are these flat out unqualified people who get into elite schools, what you see happen time and time again is these egregiously high dropout rates among underrepresented minorities in these elite schools. I can't remember the exact numbers, so I won't try to give them, but you see throughout history, and they're referenced in this study, that historically there have been these very high rates of dropout from black former applicants to elite elite law schools, because they flat out cannot keep up. And that's not to say there aren't whites that can't keep up. Of course there are. There are whites that got into the schools that were legacies, or who just got lucky, who didn't deserve to get in, and they dropped out at the same rate. However, the fact is that if the practice of affirmative action had never existed, that those students would not have dropped out of law school, because they would have gone to a slightly worse but still very good law school. If you have an academic index of, like I said, 690 to 750, you are a very good student. You're in about the top 10% of global law school applicants. However, the top 10% of law school applicants isn't always good enough to get you into a Harvard or Yale. In fact, usually it's not. Usually you have to be in the top 1%. And so what ultimately happened as a product of these affirmative action practices is that you actually have, on the whole, less net black and Hispanic doctors, lawyers, so on and so forth, than you would have had these people gone to a school like Chapel Hill, for instance, or Georgetown instead of Harvard or Yale, where they will fail out. And this is not just, a lot of people will consider this just a talking point, and again, I don't have the exact numbers, but this is borne out by the data. I would encourage anyone to read this study. Again, this is called a systemic analysis of affirmative action in law schools, and Richard Sander covers all of this in that study, and he finds that actually, on the whole, we would have more people in these underrepresented minority groups that were practicing lawyers if it were not for these practices. So on the whole, affirmative action did not just cause harm to those groups that it obviously caused harm to, those being Asians and whites, but also on the whole harms the very people that it seeks to benefit, the underrepresented minorities.
Go ahead, AZ. You were going to say something earlier. Didn't mean to cut you off, man.
I low-key genuinely forgot. But what I suppose to engage with what you just said there, I think that affirmative action could have potentially worked, but the problem is that it's essentially adding on to a problem that needed to be fixed at a fundamental level. As someone who's traveled a lot and had gone to drastically different schools, I can certainly say that like education is different depending on where you're at. Just to speak very tangentially without giving away locations, in terms of the school that I went to around New York area, in terms of more high-end areas, where my parents are doing more financially prosperous, and I was able to go to a great school. I had read, let's say, I think Mice and Men, fourth grade, I believe. But when situations and circumstances got more dour, I was moved to a more, financially adequate place that my parents could support by themselves, and was able to do so due to my father had losing his job and not working for about, I think, 3 years on end. But what I learned from that school is that I was excelling in that school in a way that I never thought I would. And one of the most troubling and concerning things about like that school, since it was my last year, I had learned that this book we would be reading was Mice and Men, and this was like my 12th year. And I was like, oh, so this is like a really, really concerning thing about like how schools are just different and how they have different educations, and more importantly, how education is so drastically different in so many different areas. And I think affirmative action helps out people in a sense that like if you really want to ensure that people get to the schools that they're supposed to be to, or at the very least ensure that people are getting enriched with better education, academics have to be like a fundamental like thing that we look at and target at an early age, rather than pushing people to places when the acumen doesn't really play to where they would have been at or where they should have gone at. That's why I think really one of the biggest problems in terms of affirmative action really ran into the majority.
This is why I think that sorry, what's the word? I'm blanking here.
Really quick before you go into that, Jack, sorry to cut in. Did you guys both see my text?
Yes, I'll shut down.
No, you can keep going. I'm saying, like, if you guys are okay, keep going with the podcast for like another 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I got to go and get this. I'm really sorry about that. Just emergency thing. I'm only going to be able to get him. But hey, Jack, me personally, thanks for being on again, man. Love to have you on another time. And Hazy, thank you again for understanding, man. And yeah, I appreciate you guys both. And I apologize for the listeners and for both of you guys as well for not being able to wrap it up to the end. But I'm going to have to.
It's one of those days.
Yeah, it's one of those days, literally.
We'll run it out. No problem, pal.
Yeah, have a good one. Thank you again.
Yeah. So what I was going to say was, to your point about there being this great variance in how academics are carried out. And I actually saw the exact same thing in my experience. I went to a private school in my youth, and I think that we read 1984 in 6th grade. And what did we read after I went to high school in a public school in 12th grade? 1984. There are certainly, I certainly agree that there are different levels of rigor in different school systems, and you see this very consistently. And that means that GPA is not a perfect indicator of someone's academic skill. And this is why I think that aptitude tests are actually very important. This is why there's this movement now to do away with the SAT and the LSAT and the ACT and make them sort of optional when you're applying to college. I think that is so wrong-headed because it's rather than rather than helping someone who has been in a bad school system whose GPA is not an accurate reflection of their academic prowess, it actually takes away the ability for them to demonstrate that they have what it takes to go to a school like Yale, like Harvard, like UCLA, and I think it's a really bad thing. And the fact is that what I think most college and graduate level academic institutions should be doing for their programs of admission should be fundamentally, okay, we're going to look at your GPA. We're going to take into account the fact that, where you went to school, if we know anything about where you went to school. And I think that most schools should favor these aptitude tests because they are highly reflective, especially the LSAT at the very least, of how well you will be doing in the program. But not to undermine any point that you were making, but I think I totally agree with your view on variance in the education qualities of different high schools and colleges. But I think that we have a remedy to that, and I don't think it's affirmative action. I think that it's aptitude tests, and sadly, we're trying to put those out right now. But you can respond to that, of course, if you disagree with me.
I was just speaking more or less to the idea that there are certainly ways that these affirmative action could have worked, but I think that they just really put its eggs all in the wrong basket. And people were looking for an immediate solution for something that really takes a longer time. It's really more of an arduous journey rather than what we were trying to do, what people were trying to do with it. I think that really being mindful of the curriculum and being able to spot very gifted students early on really gets to the malleability of seeing what they can excel at. Just in terms of what they can do or what we can do to push them and positively encourage them, because I believe that to some degree that societally we don't do that enough, especially when it comes to really young kids. Rather just kind of reiterate or be able to store information in some degree. We don't really push kids in terms of the critical thinking skills. And I think that finding a way to enforce a curriculum that engages with that obviously would really positively affect them in terms of just being more effective and find themselves in aiming higher as students. I wasn't necessarily disagreeing with it, but I was just saying that
No,
I think that,
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your point. That's my mistake. Please go on.
Yeah, we this podcast has been very fascinating to me because I think that in terms of almost everything we discussed so far, I think I really do enjoy these types of conversations, and I think in terms of I think the worst thing about a lot of systems is that people get attached to an idea and get attached to a processes and don't really take into account the underpinnings of that process. What they concern themselves with is the underpinnings of that processes rather than the process of itself. If I can put this more succinctly, the idea that people will love some sort of social care or like Obamacare or something like that. But we can find a more effective way to do it, then we can get rid of Obamacare and we can effectively ensure that more people get care. But people look at just the ridding of affirmative action as simply being, oh, you don't want to see more people of different minority or disenfranchised classes get into places of high academic institutions. But that's never the case. Rather, it's just to make sure that these people aren't failing out, that they
Yeah.
aren't like choosing to opt out of these programs because they were never situated to properly be there. For example, if I was a student, like one of the biggest things about like college football is that it really tests how good you are. Like you might think you're an excellent like athlete, but then when you get to college football, you realize how good isn't enough. You realize you have to be exceptional. You have to be almost like an anomaly in the system in some regard. Yeah. So like in that way, you start to get a bigger understanding of the scale of like a skill that it will be take to even get into the NFL. And I think to some degree, it's like a test in a way. And unless you're building that skill up from the foundation, you're never going to get to that properly. But for a lot of these people, when you deal with affirmative action this way, they're finding people who do have spark, who did have spark, who did show prosper, but unfortunately they weren't like built upon in a way that they could have effectively been at a higher, they could have been at an effective higher GPA by the time they reach college. But we'll only find people at like the tail end of like the curriculum. So I think that's like the most unfortunate thing about what's been going on with affirmative action. And I think that unfortunately that would be, I understand that would probably be far more expensive, but you know, that's kind of like the biggest problem with like doing something of that nature. It would require far more observations and like looking through the like the classes that are ongoing with younger students to even find those students. But like that's the place we should have started, and I believe that's what our priority should have been.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. That's a very good insight. Yeah, sorry for misunderstanding your point. I that's my mistake. But yeah, no, I think that comes back to what I was one thing that I was talking about earlier is that if we had done what you're describing, and even if we had simply not had the regime of affirmative action and essentially just opened the doors to minority applicants as was done in the 60s and left it at that, we would have more minorities who are lawyers, who are doctors, who are successful because they would have been in places where they were situated to thrive, and they would not have been in places where they are unable to keep up because, like you said, there are only so many people who are the exception. There are only so many people who get into Yale Law School, the number one law school in the country. There are only so many people who are capable of being admitted to Yale Law, and they are not just good; they're exceptional at the things that they've done in college and on their standardized tests, so on and so forth. And the fact is that the regime of affirmative action has affirmatively damaged those people. It has caused them to drop out of school. It has caused them to graduate at the bottom of their class and then be unable to find a job with that degree, so on and so forth. And it's a real shame. And I'm glad that the situation's been reversed. But again, the regime that you're describing would have been far preferable, and I think still may very well be preferable to what we have nowadays. But that's a good insight, man.
Thank you, because I think that one of the things I like, because if you were to graduate, even if you don't get into Harvard, I would find it far more preferable if like you got to Kingston or something of that nature and be at the top of my class rather than being like, oh, someone's looking at my job prospects and they go, well, he graduated at the bottom of like Harvard. That's not like a very appealing prospect when someone's going to evaluate whether or not you ought to get the job at that point. Because, but again, I think that like people, like I think affirmative action really was trying to do its best. Like ideally in the system of like, oh, like we're making the system, we're trying to do our best to make the system like effectively even for everyone else. I think even cannot be done unless we look at the root, unless we get to the roots of anything, because like simply trimming the trees doesn't affect anything. Like the root cause of what's going on has to be tended to the soil, and unless we're getting to that, then we're not doing anything really.
Totally. Your education doesn't start with your undergraduate institution. It starts in elementary school, right? I mean, there are countless people who go through schools that are just very clearly that underperform across the board. I mean, you hear stories constantly coming out of various school systems where where you'll hear, oh, no one in this school passed the math standardized tests, the tests to make sure that students are capable of doing math at their grade level, so on and so forth. And when we have so many institutions across this country that are essentially graduating people who are functionally illiterate or who are doing math at a fourth grade level, and all these different things, it leads to a cascading effect where no one's able to really get out of it. I mean, if you're an African American kid living in the inner city and you're going to a garbage school with garbage teachers who don't want to teach you, then what hope do you have, right? And I think it's a massive tragedy, and it speaks to a larger problem that I'm not as I don't think I'm capable of solving on a podcast, certainly. But I think that the state of education in the system or in this country is remarkably bad in many places, and I think that as people we should be doing all that we can to rectify that.
Absolutely, and I think that it's like even like a smaller problem, a macro problem, if you will. If somebody's not engaging with whatever like classes they're getting, do we understand? Like, there's a significant difference from not engaging with it because they feel as though the teacher isn't doing enough versus they don't think the curriculum is challenging enough. So then they become disinterested. And these are vastly different things that could occur within like classrooms. But enough like social problems. Like I always give like props to a lot of celebrities, like politicians, what have you, who are like really getting into like the social programs that are helping kids, getting that little bit of extra time to get refined in whatever class they're getting to and finding out what the particular issue is. Because for just using myself as a more intimate example, if there was something I did not get and then I asked the question and I didn't understand it the second time around, my brain would go into, well, I don't want to hold up the whole class. Totally. And I would feel stupid at this point if I keep asking the question and I'm genuinely not getting it. Because at some point you need like for example, one of the greatest things they did in school that I went to, when I went to a really, really well off school, is that they had a second teacher within the classroom that would go around and talk to individual students like, well, what do you not understand? Like when I asked a question and said, I don't understand, most of the time, if you have like one teacher in the classroom, they can't stop the entire class because you don't understand. They gotta go, well, like I gotta keep going. If you, at some point, I can't hold the entire class. Also, but to have that second teacher in the classroom really like affected, like ensuring that like kids understood what was going on, or like what was the fundamental misunderstanding that was occurring. It's just like little intricate things that happen on a very micro level that can be like very like crucial in some regards.
Absolutely, totally agree, man. If you don't mind, I probably have to go here in about 10 minutes. But
okay. To drop it off on a more like fun note. Oh, if you want to close out that subject matter, you certainly can. I didn't want to cut you off.
Real quick, one thing that I actually wanted to cover once I hopped on here, and this is not totally in the line of the same topic, but it's a little bit of a shift. But Sol and I chatted before I came on about, so I just got through my law school applications, and I wanted to take some time to give a little bit of advice to anyone who stumbles across this show who may be considering law school, if that's all right with you, about how they should approach applications, so on and so forth. Is that cool? Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't know he was waiting for me. My apologies.
No,
go ahead.
You're good, man. I'll take silence as a yes. So to anyone out there who stumbles across this show, who may be considering law school applications, who may be considering really any type of graduate applications, but what I know is from law school, so it may not be perfectly applicable to your discipline. I learned a few things, and I'd like to kind of cover them before we wrap up. And lesson number one that I want to instill in folks is
if you are is no matter where you are shooting for in school, no matter what schools you're targeting, it is always advisable to get your applications in as soon as you can. And what I mean by that is that it's a huge mistake. I made this mistake, and I'm living it down. It's a huge mistake to wait around to try to pull up your GPA, for instance. When I came into senior year of college, I had a GPA of about 3.6. I'm not sure what the rest of the digits were, but I wanted to pull my grades up a little bit because I had this sort of sense that getting it up to a 3.7 would help me. It's not going to. I'm just gonna. This may hurt anyone who is going through the same thought process, but it's not going to help you. If you have a student who has a 3.6 and a 170 on their LSAT, and you have a student who has a 3.7 and a 170 on their LSAT, but the student with 3.7 turns their application in 6 months after the student with 3.6, the student with 3.7 is going to have something like a 30% lower chance of getting into those school to that school that they're applying to than is the student who gets it in early. Don't fall for it. It's something that a lot of students do. They wait around to get their grades in and get their GPAs up. It's not advisable. The only circumstance in which it is ever advisable is if you are in a position to get your GPA over the school's median. If the school's median is 3.8 and you're at a 3.79, it may be advisable. That's the only circumstance, and even then, it is the benefits that you'll get from it is marginal. So do not do that. That's lesson 1. Lesson 2 is play the game. And what I mean by this is if you are, if you couldn't figure it out through the rest of this podcast, I'm a conservative, big shock. But what I mean by play the game is when you're writing your personal statement, do not reference conservative thoughts. Don't reference conservative philosophy. Don't do anything like that, because no matter how we look at it, no matter in what way you parse the data, the fact is that applications offices universally are filled with people who disagree with you politically very vehemently. And if you reference Ayn Rand and you talk about how much you love Ayn Rand, I listened to a podcast from the University of Michigan where their academic, or where their dean of admissions talks about applications, and she went on and on for an entire episode about how she rejected a student because he talked about Ayn Rand a whole lot in his personal statement. Play the game. Either do not discuss your politics in any way whatsoever. Don't even hint at them. Even if you're talking about them in the larger context of philosophy or something like that, do not hint that you are anything that will irk an admissions officer, because they don't like you, generally speaking, and it will really hurt your chances. But those are the two big pieces of advice that I have. I'm sorry that I was rambling here, but other than that, make sure that you don't kind of flail on the LSAT. Don't take the LSAT 4 times. I had a friend who wanted to take the LSAT over and over and over again until he got the score that he wanted. What you should do is you should study for the LSAT very hard. You should take it once, maybe twice, get the score that you're looking for, and never touch it again. Because the LSAT's fundamental. Don't mess around with that. And those are really the 3 fundamental pieces of advice that I've got for law school applications. I hope it helps someone out there. Even if it's only one person, it's been worthwhile.
Thank you. And I don't think you've been rambling personally. I think you've been very incredibly articulate, if I may add. And
I appreciate it.
Yeah, in terms of there being people out there that could like decline your application purely off of like political predilections, I would highly advise the thing. In terms of being apolitical, I understand the principle of ensuring that like everybody, regardless of political like paths might be, you would want to ensure that everyone is capable of speaking unfettered. But due to the, I just think like in terms of the confrontation that is often arising nowadays, and how like speakers are actively being advised from really being part of any sort of campus, it's best to play it safe and speak as apolitical as possible.
I absolutely agree. I mean, there's just no question about it. It's especially true if you're conservative. I hate to say it, but the fact is that conservatives will be actively downgraded, even if it's sort of just in the admissions officer's mind when they're reviewing your application. Left wingers generally will not be, or at the very least, they won't be as much. But to your point, it's totally advisable to just stay as apolitical as possible. Play the game, say what you need to say, so that when someone reads your personal statement, they'll like it. But yeah, man, if you want to jump to another topic, please do. I just wanted to get that little tidbit in before we wrapped up.
Yeah, it's certainly unfortunate, especially since I think that in terms of bastions of like critical thought, I definitely believe that college should be that last place where we really do exercise our thoughts. But in terms of wrapping up the podcast, I think just like leaving off on a more fun note, I would like to ask you a question about The Boys. And we're not talking about the drinks neither. The Boys. What would be your like favorite episode, and or an episode that you believe has a very poignant message?
Oh God, it's been a while since I watched the show. Let me think for a minute here. You're putting me on the spot about something that has been out of my head for a year, unfortunately. But let me think. One episode that I really did enjoy was in the most recent season. It was the episode where Soldier Boy, the main villain of the most recent season, is woken up and he's acclimating to the new world, or really he's not acclimating. But he's this great sort of I guess commentary on it. I don't really know if it's a commentary, but at the very least, he is an image of it's basically what Captain America pretends to be, but what he really would be like if he had been woken up in the 21st century. This guy's walking around. He's flagrantly racist. He's just this villain character basically, and everyone is in shock and aghast by what he says all the time. And it's kind of fun. It's just on a very basic level. It's funny because it's this guy who's a total fish out of water, and not only that, he wants to be the fish out of water because he still believes that he's right, because he's just not adapted to the times. And it probably has a social commentary of basically the same social commentary that the show makes about a lot of people, about basically everyone is kind of just a product of their environment. And the social commentary is neither here nor there, but I personally found his character a really funny kind of play on the classic Captain America. What would happen if we dropped a man from the 1940s onto a 21st century street in urban city? It's a really great take on that circumstance, and I love it. I think it's hilarious. Everyone should go watch it.
Just to bring it in to some of the episodes that we liked a lot is A-Train's death, per se. A-Train, after the hero orgy occurs, AJ takes retribution upon one of the heroes that crippled his brother, decided to run him at accelerating speed, just completely just skin-roading the absolute fuck out of him. If I could be vulgar for 1 second. But in its circumstance, A-Train gives up basically his life. He sacrifices his life to get revenge in this very moment. And in this moment in time, A-Train is thinking of someone other than himself. He has been very much true. He's been cowardice in the face of Homelander. He's given up altruistic heroes, the most ideal heroes, when Starlight was talking about working in tandem with another hero to basically overthrow Homelander. And in this very moment, this is one of the instances in which he thinks of something other than himself. He literally could not use his powers because, well, his heart couldn't handle it. And so it was just such an amazing moment. And honestly, I thought the character could have departed from the series had they decided to keep him dead at that point in the series.
Totally agree. That you're right. That was a great scene. It was a great character arc. I mean, it's just not to we'll wrap up here in a second. I'm sorry for going on, but it was a great moment where this guy has just been totally self-centered throughout his entire tenure on the show. He's just scum of the earth villain. There's no one that's more sort of antagonizable. And in his last moment, what's he doing? He's actually doing a good thing. And his heart literally gives out from it. It's so good. It's a great moment in the show. But man, thanks for. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, yes, I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was just gonna say, hey man, thanks for having me on. I gotta take off. I hate that we can't keep it going, but it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for you and Sola for putting this together, and with any luck, hopefully I'll be back on for a future episode sometime. But thank you for having me, whether or not that's the case.
Always a pleasure. It was an excellent episode. I'm glad we talked about a myriad of topics, and I know that we have different views, but it's just so great to have like something of a very productive conversation the way we had it here. To the audience, this is Tasty Dialects. You've seen us all in HD. Unfortunately, we won't have Sola giving his official sign out, but hopefully you enjoyed this episode nevertheless. Until next time, peace.